Good evening, good evening, good evening, my friends. Gladdens me greatly to greet you. I was fortunate enough after high school, though, to be able to hook up with a band. And we played wedding music and rock and roll. And that band launched me into a lot of different areas. Ended up playing on Rush Street. When I was when I was 18, I went to work for the police department. One of my first jobs was developing pictures for the Democratic Convention. And I was a dog catcher for a while for them. And then, before I was 20 years old, I became a policeman. I was playing on Rush Street at the time in the band till 4 in the morning, drinking too many Harvey Wallbangers, and trying to show up for roll call at 8 a.m. And I was into the life. I spent most of my 20s as a police officer, doing things I probably shouldn't have. And at 35, actually, I ended up getting married. My wife and I have been married, well, happily for 27 years, and that's not too bad out of 31. So we're doing pretty good. We have 7 children, 1 of each. Those of you that have more than 2 know what I'm talking about. They're all doing relatively well. We're very proud of them. My kids forced me to go back to school when I was 48 years old, and I went and picked up a bachelor's degree in law enforcement management and a master's in business and a master's in psychology. The assignments that I had as a police officer, I worked beat car on the south side for my first 10 years. After that, I ended up going to the north side, working a beat car for a few years, and I investigated racial, religious, and ethnic incidents. And I became officer friendly after that. I did that for about 10 years. And from there I went back to a beat car and ended up writing something. And I went back into this beat car and I saw these officers. I had like 27 years on the job, and I saw these young officers who were struggling with things that I thought were non-issues. I didn't understand why they were having such a hard time with these things. So I wrote a little booklet, and I tried to market it to the police department. The superintendent at the time, Terry Hillard, got a copy of it, and he called me downtown and said, "We're taking you out of a beat car, putting you at the academy," where I ended up writing lesson plans and teaching. And the areas that I kind of drifted towards were ethics and mental health and stress management and things of that nature. Now, during the time that I got married, well, before I got married, I certainly was not a Catholic. I didn't act like one. I had been baptized a Catholic, went to Catholic schools, but I didn't act like one. And then I had, I guess, it would be called an aha experience, an overflowing of God's grace, perhaps. One day I'm changing my firstborn, and I did something, and he mimicked me. And I thought it was cute. And I did it again, and he mimicked me again. And I continued to do it back and forth, and then all of a sudden a light bulb went off. And it dawned on me that if I continued living like I lived, in about 15 years, I would have an idiot on my hands. And that was the day I started to turn around. And I started asking questions, ended up going to a class, and I met a gentleman who actually is here tonight, guy in the second from the last row with the white hair, and he introduced me to a place right by St. Mary the Angels. It was an Opus Dei center. And they answered a lot of questions for me, and started my first faith journey over again. And what they told me seemed to be pretty logical. So I continued my journey through that, tried to instill the faith in my kids. I still pray for them a lot. And at the academy, I ended up being the lead instructor for several classes. The communications classes, the ethics classes, the stress management classes, and I wrote most of the lesson plans for that. Jeff mentioned that I have an affinity for natural law, and that's true. I took something I heard from actually Bishop Fulton Sheen. Some of you may remember him. He was one of our first televangelists, I guess. And he had a show called Life is Worth Living, I believe.
Yes.
And he talked about this concept on one of his tapes. And this is probably the foundation, or one of the foundations that I use in teaching our police recruits. Police have a very stressful jobs for a lot of different reasons. There's a quote I use from Nietzsche, who says, "Whoever chases monsters must be careful that he does not become a monster, because when you look into the abyss looks back into you." And I think, certainly Nietzsche I think he was an atheist. He wasn't a very nice man, but I take that and I put it in the police context, and what that means to me is that cops stand belly to belly, face to face with evil. We see it, feel it, taste it, touch it, smell it, and it changes us. Now, it doesn't have to change us for the worse. It can make us better if we approach the dealings with it appropriately and allow God to kind of work through us with people. I've come to the conclusion that the laws that govern human behavior are actually just a subset of the laws that govern the stars in the sky. And when we break those laws, there's consequences. Now, Fulton Sheen kind of put it this way. He said, everybody is two people. And this is exactly what I do in my classes. In fact, I did it today in an ethics class. The first person is who I am. The person who I am. And that person is the person that oftentimes causes me shame. I don't want to tell anybody about that person. Then there's the other person, who I ought to be. And who I ought to be is something that I need to strive for. Well, the further these two are apart, the more tension enters our life. And what's another word for tension? Stress. And at some point in time, as these two separate, what's going to happen? We snap. I think that's what happens to people. And who we ought to be is tied up in our natural laws. And there's two natural laws, actually, that our common law system was based upon, and also our business system and our justice system is based upon these two laws. And the two laws are, one, do what you've agreed to do. And the second one is, don't encroach on another person or their property. You have the right to do anything you want, but your right ends where my nose and my property begins, just as my rights end where your nose and your property begins. Our business and contract law is all based upon doing what people agree to do. Our criminal and tort laws are based upon not encroaching on other people or their properties. Cops have a hard time with this. I don't think they really get it. And part of it has to do with the fact that power changes people. And living in the culture we live in, because so few people really have a set of standards, power just twists their thinking and gets them to do things that they normally wouldn't do. What they don't understand, though, is that those things that they're doing oftentimes are their own demise. They destroy themselves and they destroy their families. I talk an awful lot about them to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because it affects so many police officers as well as our military people. But the three main causes for PTSD are exposure to traumatic incidents. And exposure to trauma means interpersonal violence. When people are exposed to that, It troubles us. Now the second cause, and I won't go into the reasons for this, but it's betrayal by leadership. And the third cause is the dehumanization of people. Third cause of PTSD. Well, it's very interesting because I do an exercise, I just did it today, and I say, let's keep this real. What I want you to do is write down 2 words that cops, when they're riding around in their squad car, use to describe the citizens they serve. And everybody kind of chuckles and laughs. And then I have them say the 2 words. If I get 2 from everybody in a class of 50, about 46 to 48 of them are negative words. And 2 are neutral, occasionally a positive one, but very seldom. And then I ask them if that's a form of dehumanization. Is this dehumanizing? So what are we doing to ourselves? And there's another model that I introduced in class that I've taken from Stephen Covey. It's called See, Do, Get. The See, Do, Get model says that how we see things, how we perceive them, our attitude towards things, determines what we do about it. And what we do about it then in turn determines the result or what we get. So if we see people in a negative light, does that affect what we do? Does it dehumanize them? And if it does, then what are we getting in the end? There's a quote I use from actually he's a New York policeman, but it could be any big city cop. And the quote, I'll paraphrase it, is, I feel like a garbage man. I deal with human trash all day. And I suppose that's from looking into the abyss, from dealing with the 10% of the population that want to act like the animals. But our job is to treat them with the dignity and the respect that a human being deserves, in spite of the behavior that they exhibit, acting like animals. So I try to persuade cops about this. I'm not sure if I'm getting through to them, but I do know this. At least once a month I'll get one of our recruits coming back to me, and I get an opportunity also to do all the new supervisors and some of the old ones. And they tell me that the story kind of goes like this. You know, at the time when I was listening to you, I thought it was all BS. But I'll tell you what, you were right on the money. And I think that God has put me in the position that I'm in, allowing me to do what I'm doing, because this is what He wants for His police officers. Cops are the guardians of the liberty that is in this country. And most people really don't understand that at all. They don't understand. Here's a test I'll give you. Think of something, anything, that improved the lot of human beings that was available to the masses and invented before 1776. There's nothing. There's nothing. In the last 200 years, with a trend line of quality of life for human beings has shot upward. And the reason is because our founders said that all men are created equal and deserve the dignity that God has placed in us. That's our founders. There was never a group of people before that that ever decided that they were going to live by that rule, that everybody's equal. And consequently, without even understanding it, they started something called free markets, allowing people to do what they did best and allowing their creativity to come out. Cops are protectors of that. That many people are seeing that dwindle away. And we all wonder why. Well, maybe we should all go back to the founders and see what they have to say about it. I think they were right on the money. Anyway, that's a wrap for me. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Pardon me, I come from a long line of policemen, so aware of all the stress and problems it causes. And I was particularly struck by your, facing the abyss of evil, because I know that's a big issue of policemen. When you were a policeman, how did you deal with that?
My first 10 years, I drank a lot. All right? I did a lot of stupid stuff. Right? Heck, on the weekends I was playing in a rock and roll band, so I loved it. By about year 7 or 8, I started recognizing that something was wrong. I didn't understand it at the time, and I ended up taking a leave of absence from the job. I took a 3-month leave and I went down to Mexico and I lived and I studied Spanish. And that gave me a new perspective on life. The family I lived with had 5 children. They were a pretty solid Catholic family. And they influenced me tremendously. And then 2 years later I took another leave of absence and I went to Guatemala and did something similar with a family. It allowed me to clear my head. I started doing some adventure travel, climbing mountains, going out in the ocean and sailboats and stuff like that. And it kind of like was a journey back. And then finally, I started to come back to the church before I got married, because we got married in the church. But then once we had the children, and I had that recognition that I was raising an idiot, because he was copying me. I was the example. So, and after that, actually it was pretty easy. Once I had a stronger faith base.
Are you able, when you're teaching, are you able to use your faith experience? Or is that kind of...
Let me put it this way. Because I'm teaching in a government agency, right, of course I can't overtly do it.
Yeah.
But most of my recruits get it.
Okay.
They understand it. They can read between the lines, and they understand.
So as a policeman, a lot of policemen are very idealistic when they go in, and then you see that evil. Obviously, disillusionment follows.
Oh yeah, you feel like somebody licks all the red off your candy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, then you start doing all the drinking and all the other goofy stuff. What are other ways to deal with that? You went out on adventure trips and took leave of absence. What are some of the other ways policemen cope with that?
Well, what I tell our recruits is that before they leave the academy, they need to have some type of set of standards that are going to govern their behavior.
Okay.
And I'm always asking them, what do you use? And I constantly ask the question, is what you're thinking of doing going to bring you closer to who you ought to be, or closer to who you really are? And because that distance, as it separates, people literally snap. I think it's a good course in mental health, too.
Yeah.
I found like a policeman, you might go with a good intention, but then you got the policeman becomes like a family, and then you got peer pressure within themselves.
Tremendous peer pressure.
And they might stray from what their original intention was.
The first 2 years a person comes on this job, they spend trying to fit in. Now, if they have a set of standards that they're going to live by, and they stick with them, they'll usually do okay. Now, my first 10 years, I feel shame when I think of the stuff that I did. However, the last several years that I worked the street, I had little to no problem, because the people that were misbehaving, word got out real quick. Stay away from him. He won't tolerate it. All right? The others, I was fine with them. I became good friends. And I'd like to say that that's most of the police officers are trying to do a good job. They're pretty good at it. They want to do the good job, but there's so many obstacles that are placed in their way. Yes.
What role did your mother play in this, if she did?
Oh, she kicked my butt. Yeah, no, my mom was a strong influence. She kept praying for me a lot. She used to drag me to novenas on Friday nights when I was in grammar school. I remember that. And she just kept praying for me along the way, I guess. And she's still alive. She's 88, I think, maybe 89. I'm not even sure anymore. Lost count. But yeah, she's doing good. She's got some health problems and stuff like that, although she's not on any meds yet, which is very unusual in this day and age. Anybody else? Okay, thank you.